Morning, I think you can see me. My presentation is divided into two parts. First, I'm going to tell you about the introduction and the political context that surrounds the part devoted to climate of Cluster 5, and then I'm going to explain the structure and the content of the working plan of Cluster 5. And finally, the main novelty we have this year in the work program, which is still not finished, which is the missions. Another of the novelties we have now is the partnerships, but in the part of climate, we don't have any partnerships. So we're going to start with the political context. When we speak about anything related to Horizon Europe, we mustn't forget that R&D is not an end by itself. It's a means to reach the goals. So policies influence in the content of the work programs and the topics. So the results of the projects that are financed by Horizon Europe are going to influence the content of future policies, the evidence that's generated, and so on. So the policies to take into account are reflected in the different documents of Horizon Europe, work programs, the topics, and so on. And it's very important to know them to see how our proposal is going to contribute to this. As an example, I'm going to show you some of the most important strategies and policies that we have to take into account. Some of the most important are the global policies such as the COP21, the Paris Agreement with binding commitment to reduce the greenhouse emissions in 40%. But now the European mission is more ambitious, and the goal is that the European Union has to be neutral climatically for 2050. So the Commission has proposed a commitment. This has become a legally binding commitment. And the goal of the European policy is that all sectors contribute to the reduction of emissions from now to 2050, and they have created a framework to follow this path. They also propose a new goal to reduce these emissions in 55% for 2030 compared to the values of 1990. So this climate law is framed within a new strategy of adaptation to climate change, which was adopted the 24th of February of this year, with includes intelligent adaptation with all the climate data as systemic adaptation, giving support to the development of all the policies at all levels, and also accelerating the action and developing solutions in order to contribute to the reduction to risk related to climate. We also have the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of them affect climate, 7, the 9th, innovation and structure, and also the 13th Sustainable Development Goal. The Green Deal is also very important. They have 8 areas of activity. One is a greater level of climate action, supply of green energy, and intelligent mobility. Where do we place Cluster 5? We have the 3 pillars of Horizon Europe, and in Pillar 2, we have Cluster 5, climate, energy, and mobility. These are 3 topics that are separate. They are very different. They are in this cluster, but they all have their own entity, independent entity. I'm just going to talk about climate. This is the younger sister, the one that has the least budget. 9% of the budget is for destination 1, which is 1,300 million are devoted to climate. 35% of all the budget of Horizon Europe has to be destined to actions related to climate change. This is important from the point of view of opportunities. We don't have to pay attention only to whether, if we're going to do something related to climate, we don't need to go to the destination climate. There are opportunities in other clusters to do things related to climate. Maybe climate is treated in a more like secondary way, but we could incorporate a second activity in a project in digital or in industrial. In cluster 6, for example, we could add something related to climate. We must take this into account in order to look at all the work programs to see opportunities to deal with climate. In cluster 6, we also, in cluster 5, we deal with climate from the point of view of climate science, improving our understanding of climate. In cluster 6, we're talking about the influence of climate on ecosystems. We must understand the process of construction of the working programs, how we reach the calls in order to have the rationale of the proposal. We need a rationale in order to explain the impacts of our work. So very briefly, in the legislative package of Horizon Europe, there was a series of intervention areas, which are the priority areas. And based on this strategy, we define the strategic areas of intervention, the strategic guidelines, and then we have some expected impacts of these proposals. From these strategic orientations and expected impacts, we define the work program with the different calls for proposals and the different destinations. Here we have the structure of a working program, which is not very different to what we had in Horizon Europe, for the ones who knew it. We have the expected impacts, which are translated into destinations and work programs with the different calls for each one of the destinations. And within each one of these calls, you have the different topics. Now I'm going to tell you about the structure of cluster 5, which is devoted to climate. Among all the topics that have to be dealt with in cluster 5, the areas of intervention, we have what are we going to work in climate science. In cluster 5, we have all these different intervention areas. In green, you see the ones related to energy. The orange ones are related to mobility. There's one of communities and cities, and one related to climate science and solutions. And within this climate science, we are going to work on generating knowledge on climate science. Europe is a leader in climate science, and we want to keep this leadership. We want to participate, creating supporting policies like the ones that I've told about, strategy to adaptation of climate change, the Green Deal, all these strategies that are related to the climate. We also want to improve the improvement of models, climate predictions at all levels. We want to define adaptation itineraries, adaptation pathways, and also work in new climate services that facilitate the work to the users. And all these areas where we want to work in are going to be reflected in the working programs. For whoever has seen the work program of 2021, what they will have seen is that in climate, we had two destinations. Destination 1 was specific of climate, and destination 2 is cross-sectoral for mobility, energy, and climate. In the 2022 call, destination 1 is still about climate, but we don't have any topic in destination 2. Now I'm going to tell you about the different topics very briefly. The ones we have in destination 1. We have two calls. D1 is in 2 stages, and D2 is a single stage. First, we're going to have a look at D101, which is the call for that has 2 stages. First of all, the first topic is new approaches for the removal of carbon dioxide. So in this topic, we want to identify and extend the range of the solutions based on nature and also technological solutions for the removal of carbon dioxide. We have to base our work on pilots and experimental projects and new developments, and we have to carry out an analysis and a technical and theoretical analysis of the effects, the impact of these pilots with cost studies, with different studies. We have to look for synergies with other projects of the same cluster, cluster 5 of the call 2021, and also with the ones that are related to the sea. We are also looking for the integration of different scientific communities with different disciplines and different areas of society in order to have a multidisciplinary point of view. Now we're talking about a river which is 21 million euros project and 7 million for each project. In this case, we have a condition for being elected. We need satellite systems. We need to use Copernicus or Galileo. If the satellite systems are used, you need to use Copernicus or Galileo. In topic 2, you have the socio-economic risks of climate change. We need to improve the understanding of nature and the scope of the physical risks of climate change and also the socio-economic implication. We have 3 stages, 2030, 2050, and 2100. We must extrapolate the current policies with different scenarios, both social and climate scenarios. We have to create scenarios that compare situations in which mitigations, very ambitious mitigation policies have been implemented, and there's a lower increase of temperature, and also including the costs and advantages of these very ambitious measures. The JRC can participate in this topic, which is exceptional as a member of the consortium, as any other partner, and they will also receive it is an RAI.
So el tercer topic se trata de aumentar ciencias sociales para el uso de las estrategias del suelo en el contexto del cambio climático. Y lo que se trata de es conseguir una comprensión realista de los factores que subyacen a las decisiones sobre cómo se usa la tierra, cómo puede orientarse este uso de la tierra.
Focus for the efficient and socially responsible consecution of the different political goals related to climate. A set of tools has to be developed at every level that are aligned with the goals and strategies of the policies, and we must take into account all the aspects related to mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Which aspects related to mitigation and adaptation we have related to land use? So for the capturing of gases, the soil has to produce food and raw materials. We must recover the loss of biodiversity. We must consider the socioeconomic dynamics in the land use. And we must consider that in the different regions of Europe, there's different land uses. This is a RIA, and 7 million euros per project. All the topics have 2 stages. The call for tenders was started the 12th of October, and the deadlines for the first stage is 10th February 2022, and for the second stage, the deadline, the ones that are invited to move from the first to the second stage, the deadline would be the 27th of February. First stage, you have to present a brief 10-page proposal. It's only summary, and that those 10 pages are assessed, and the ones that are invited, they would move on to the second stage. So the dates are 10 February, 27 February. Second destination, that would be the full proposal would be presented just in one stage. We have 5 topics here. This is a topic that is about verification and reconciliation of the estimates of climate forces, of greenhouse effect gases. We compare, well, the mapping of gases, greenhouse gases, with the systems of assessment and monitoring that we have in Europe, particularly in Europe and the countries associated to Horizon Europe. In all these assessment systems, we have to add all the observations we have both by satellite and also in situ on the ground, and we have to compare the results. We must not only include greenhouse effect gases, but also aerosols and other polluters that could be relevant in the as far as climate change is concerned. We must develop solid methodologies so that we decrease the uncertainty in the estimation of gases, and we must improve the gas attribution, finding out where they come from, whether they come from anthropogenic sources or from natural sources. A particularity of this is that the number of pages is extended. Now you can include 60 pages. The maximum pages has moved from 60 to 50. But in some topics, such as this one, you can extend your project up to 60 pages maximum. In this case, is if we use satellite detection, we must use Copernicus and Galileo. This is a RIA that has 15 million euros, 5 million euros per project. In the second topic that we want to develop high resolution Earth system models for global and regional climate change projections. We want to develop terrestrial model that include all the parts of the Earth that represent the processes, the climate processes, including the ones that affect climate change globally. We must consider particularly the Arctic and Antarctic regions that are key elements for the global climate change, and for the valorization of the models and improvement of estimation technologies. We must collect data of the Earth and paleoclimatic observations too. So the number of pages is also extended to 60, and you also have to use Copernicus and Galileo as satellites. Due to the scope of the topic, any country of the African Union can be considered a European country, because there's some African countries are not financed, but in this case, we would accept these countries as financeable. This is a RIA which has 20 million euros, and it would be 10 million euros per project. The third topic, which is the improvement of integrated assessment models in support of climate policies. We must approach the weak points of these models, the capacity limitations, in order to provide robust evidence that give a good support to the policies of mitigation of climate change at all levels and at different time frames. Some aspects that have to be improved are the sectorial aspects, the changes in the sectors of economy due to the growth of circularity, changes in the time frames, technological improvements, changes in the lifestyle of citizens, the effects of climate policies, for example. This is a topic where the number of pages is extended to 60. It's a RIA, 15 million euros, 5 million per project. The last two topics of this destination is, we have number 4, which is supporting the formulation of adaptation strategies through improved climate predictions. So this is about improving the seasonal predictions, both at the regional and local areas, both for Europe and then for the rest of the world. We want to close the gap between the capacities of the current models and the estimations of possible prediction in the future. We want to align better with the needs of the final users, and we want these predictions to be more reliable, and we want to be able to create practical measures based on these predictions. We must develop methodologies in order to link these predictions, meteorological weather predictions with the climate predictions. We need much more precise and reliable predictions, superstational, stational, for every season and for longer periods of time. We must improve the assessment of risk, and we must detect the turning points that are important in the climate events. This is also extended to 60 pages. You have to use Copernicus or Galileo, and it's an RAI. And the last topic of destination, which is assessing, letting nature help do the job in relation to greenhouse gases. We must understand better how the natural capacity of ecosystems with minimal intervention can contribute to the carbon sequestration and also contribute to the improvement of biodiversity. We must use the solutions that are based on nature. When we carry out the interventions, they must be minimal. Actions must promote interdisciplinary research focused on the nexus climate biodiversity in order to foster the knowledge in order to deal with these challenges better. We must base our work on previous experiences that provide evidence in relation to carbon sequestration with ecosystems that have been restored in a natural way. So we must base our work on these studies. We must include the restoration of trophic chains. We can write up to 60 pages, and the use of Copernicus, Galileo, if a satellite is used, those are the satellites to be used. 8 to 9 million euros for each project. As you see, there are not many topics. There are only 8 topics for 2022. All the topics of the second part of the destination are single stage. The opening of the call is in 2000. The deadline is the 10th of February, like the first stage of the first part of the destination. And now we're moving on to the novelties of Horizon Europe that affect differently all the different clusters. The main novelties, we have Innovation European Council in order to finance and entering of in the market of disruptive technologies. And we also have the missions and the new partnership approach, which is what we had before, but streamlined but basically it's more or less the same. It's an evolution of the partnerships we had before. The greatest novelty is missions. In cluster 5, we do have partnerships, but they're not partnerships that affect climate. So I'm going to focus only on the missions. My colleagues will tell you about the partnerships. Very briefly, what are the missions? We must distinguish between the areas of mission areas from the missions. There were 5 mission areas. We have healthy oceans, climate neutral cities, soil health, cancer, and adaptation to climate change. The mission areas are areas where the missions are defined. Thematic areas where the missions are defined. These are specific missions. They are great challenges that society has that require rapid action, rapid solutions. So we are going to set very specific targets with a very specific time frame. To solve these problems in these 5 mission areas, one mission was defined for each area, but we could have more in the future. For the moment, 5 missions have been defined. I'm not going to focus on the rest, but I'm only going to focus on the mission related to climate, which is a climate resilient Europe by 2030. Its mission is focused on one of the clusters, and this is the exception. It is a mission which is cross-cluster because it affects cluster 5 and also cluster 6. The goal is that in 2030, Europe is resilient to the effects of climate change. So we have to act on systems that are key: water, agriculture, and food. They want to set tools that allow us to follow the necessary path to reach 2030, to reach the goals, the targets of mitigation and adaptation to the effects of climate change. We're going to work on different facets, on governance and digitization, and also in training. Missions are not only R&D topics. You'll see that we need other types of actions, other sources of finance, not only of R&D, but also of other different areas such as economy, society, and so on. It's not only R&D projects, and we need actions in other types of programs. In our case, Horizon Europe, we are going to need great pilot projects to see that the solutions work, they're scalable.
The work done so far is the following. 5 areas were selected in September 2020. The mission reports were done. Some people started working on missions. They carried out reports with the outcomes and the outreach for each of the missions. Between January and July 2021, the implementation plan was developed, upon which the working program is based. The work program hasn't been launched yet. This is something that will be published until December 2021. An initial work program was launched in 2021 with CSAs, the aim of which were to prepare the ground so that missions could start as soon as possible. Recently, the implementation plan was published, and as I said, the work programs with the different topics will be published in December 2021, with deadlines between March and April 2022. In the case of climate change adaptation, the main goal of this mission is to promote 150 communities and regions which are resilient to climate change. This is based on 3 specific goals represented on this pyramid. Goal 1 is to prepare and plan for climate resilience, supporting regions and communities so that they better understand the risks and opportunities. Local and regional administrations will be given access to climate risk profiles, better early warning systems, and support for the development of risk assessment plans. The second goal wants to accelerate transformations towards resilience. Work will be done with over 150 regions to accelerate their adaptations towards climate resilience with support to innovation and the development and implementation of solutions. The third goal would be to at least carry out 75 demonstrations of these solutions with support to all regions and communities in the European Union. This mission will evolve in 3 different stages. The preparation stage from 2021 to 2023. This is the one we find ourselves right now. The first work program will start with the support system to the different missions through the Vision Implementation Platform, which will be our platform to support missions based on relevant projects within the framework of the Horizon 2020. Between 60 and 120 regions will start the participation in the mission. Afterwards, there will be a period to assess the progress to see if changes are needed, if changes in financing is required. The next phase will take place between 2024 and 2027. This is the full deployment. The mission will carry out the necessary adjustments if they are needed after the assessment that I talked about, and other actions will be implemented to make the most out of it, and also including 100 additional regions and communities. The consolidation stage would happen outside within the framework of the next framework program. And this will happen, as I said, this will be a consolidation that will take place within the next framework. The budget for this first stage is 387 million euros. This is an estimation. As I said, the work program is still in a draft version. We won't know the final figure until December. There may be small changes, but what we have so far is already quite well established, but we cannot rule anything out. As I said, missions are not only R&D within the European framework. This requires a lot of collaboration, and this budget is not enough to implement the objectives that I talked about with so many regions, scaling these solutions up to a larger space all over Europe. It wouldn't be possible. This basic budget will be used as initial funding to unblock additional funding from private and public sources. On this graph, you have an overview of the way that the budget of this mission will be distributed between the 3 objectives. In red, you see the specific Horizon Europe funds, and in blue are the funds, both private and public funds. You can see how it's distributed. If you take into account that red is 397 million, you can see how much is it. We are expecting the support of the European investment banks, private funds, cohesion funds, investment funds, etc. The implementation plans are detailed depending on the mission with different degrees of detail, but we see what are the actors of the financial ecosystems that we are talking with, so that they provide financing for each of the missions. Implementation plans are available on the internet. You can download them for those of you who are interested in this. I'm going to briefly mention the topics that are going to be financed. in the next work program. I will just briefly mention the topics. First, we expect that the call will be open in January, and we expect it to be closed by mid-April. I think the official date is April the 12th, but topic one would focus on climate risk assessments in European regions with a transparent, harmonized approach for Europe. The first stage would be used to develop the risk model to find out vulnerabilities. And secondly, this would be implemented in European regions. Also, recommendations would be drafted to implement emergency management systems. The idea is that these models are available for people who are not experts, so that they can be used by anyone without specific climate knowledge. On the second stage, the consortium will have a budget to provide financing to other projects in calls that these consortiums prepare for 50 regions to carry out these risk assessments and to make use of climate services that have been already developed in Horizon 2020 and outside the scope of this program. Topic number two, support to regions for the development of climate resilient ways. Direct support will be given to regions, and also cascade funding will be included. These innovation portfolios need to identify the needs in the SP3 program, and they must include a series or intervention and solutions that are innovative and designed specifically so that they can be used at different scales in different parts of the system. Topic number three, asset adaptation. When I talk about assets, I refer to buildings, infrastructure, etc. A modeling of assets in risk due to climate change must be done so to adapt them to the situation. The gaps in the availability, accessibility, and analysis and processing of data must be done. Gaps also between models and support methodologies. This is something that is closely related with insurance companies. So cooperation with these companies must be sought so that they can participate in these projects and consortia. The fourth topic that we expect to appear here is climate resilience demonstrators with specific impacts that leading to an increase in resilience and adaptation to climate change all over the European region and neighboring countries. So a collaboration between the most advanced regions is expected to happen. The front runners this is a concept that the Commission likes very much. Regions which have already some experience in terms of resilience and climate change adaptation should work as tutors of regions with less experience and which are also vulnerable. This exchange of knowledge among regions must be promoted. Lastly, and this is not such a technical issue, the idea is to obtain the involvement of citizens and co-creation also, which is kind of a trendy issue. The idea is to include citizens so that they participate, to have them committed for the co-creation of this change in society, which is necessary to achieve resilience. These changes is not going to be possible if citizens are not involved. This topic is also related with 3 missions objectives. As you understand, this is not focused only on a specific topic, but rather on all of them. The idea is to provide support to regions and communities participating in the mission beyond technical issues in order to strengthen the commitment of citizens, the administration, local entities, NGOs, all kinds of organizations and associations to promote this change that society requires. These proposals need to include participative structures. They must include or promote synergies with other actions of the European Union. They need to promote the participation of citizens in the design and development of climate services that we referred to in the previous topic, and also to collect, elaborate, and publish data. Citizens can also participate in the collection of data through the devices that we use every day, like mobile telephones. Well, this is the end of my presentation about the work programs. At the cluster 5, we are 6 people, but 2 of us focus mainly on the climate. Lidia Gonzalez and myself. I'm the national point and point. You can contact any of us if you have any questions in the future. You can see our emails. The service provided by CDTI is not only to solve doubts, we can review proposals. If you want to submit them, this is a service that we provide freely, mainly to Spanish programs and coordinators. You can see our Twitter account here, and also the new at the new Horizon Europe website. You can see our social media to receive all the news about the events that we do. There's also a Telegram and a Twitter channel, and that's it. We are at your disposal for anything you need.